welcome to this podcast for the Economic Society of Australia, where we are talking to inspiring Australian economists to provide aspiring Australian economists with a bit of a looking glass into where a career in economics can take you. I am Morgan Richards, Senior Economist at Deloitte Access Economics, and today we are talking to Dr. Fraser Thompson at Cyan Ventures. So to kick things off, would you be willing to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your organisation and your role?
Sure. Thank you very much for having me on this. So Fraser Thompson, I'm the co-founder and managing director of Cyan Ventures. And we have a mission of helping transformational first-of-a-kind projects in the clean energy sector shift from labs into deployment.
So would you be able to provide us a bit of information around your journey to where you are now? Were there any events or experiences that have pushed you towards environmental and climate economics or that sort of venture space?
Yeah, happy to. As Steve Jobs, I think once said, you kind of join the dots backwards on your career. So it's far from a linear path. But I went from initially looking at journalism and studying Mandarin and economics at university. But then I got really sort of a bit more fascinated by the economics side. And I've always had a real passion for economics. I thought it's just a fantastic toolkit to be able to really understand how markets function and how we as a society organise ourselves effectively. So I decided that I really wanted to work in development economics. And to do that, I needed to get a master's and a PhD in economics to give me the kind of toolkit that I could feel like I could contribute. So I was fortunate enough to receive a Rhodes Scholarship, and I did a master's and PhD in economics at Oxford University, and then worked at the World Bank and met a terrific bunch of people, worked across the Development Research Group and the East Asia and Pacific Division. But I also realised my rate of learning was probably going to slow down. I felt like I could see where my career was going over the next 10 to 20 years. And that didn't feel as exciting. And so one of my mentors at the World Bank suggested that probably I needed to find a place where I would build my human capital at a faster rate and would get me excited. So I ended up shifting to management consulting at that time. So I joined McKinsey in the Middle East. And the Middle East because they were doing some transformational economic projects there at the time. And it was a group of new leaders there that were really trying to tackle everything from education reform to rethinking diversification of the economy. So it was a wonderful time to be able to work with those kind of stakeholders. And I thought because it'd be 2 years, but it ended up being close to 10 years. I got the chance to work across not only the Middle East, but Europe and Asia. And it was at McKinsey I got exposed to sustainability. So McKinsey had built these things called marginal abatement cost curves, which basically are an economic tool to help understand the cost and prioritisation of different abatement opportunities. And the other bit that McKinsey ended up doing was realising that decarbonisation is really an economic rather than an environmental question. And so I did a lot of work on not only abatement curves, but working with different regions around how do you think about an economic reform program that addresses some of that transition from fossil fuel-based industries to clean energy transition. And so worked across many different countries on that and was very fortunate to do that. And then the last part of my McKinsey career, I led McKinsey Global Institute, which is the economic research arm McKinsey on their sustainability work. And that was also a wonderful opportunity. And then after close to 10 years, I left McKinsey to co-found Alpha Beta, which is a economic strategy firm, which I co-founded with a friend from university, Andrew Charlton, who's now gone to politics. And I led the Singapore office and Andrew led the Australian office. And in the Singapore office, we end up doing a lot of work with organisations like Temasek, which is a sovereign wealth fund in Singapore, and the World Economic Forum, where we try to take an investor perspective to sustainability. So using that economics toolkit in a bit of a different way. And then also got the opportunity to work with the ASEAN Secretariat, so the 10 Southeast Asian nations, on a range of connectivity issues, and including the ASEAN Power Grid. which is a reform to try to trade more electricity across borders in Southeast Asia. And that particular project was quite pivotal for me because I realized that even if we did this, the Southeast Asian countries were growing so quickly and actually didn't quite have the diversity of renewable energy resources to have enough effectively liquidity in the system to be able to transport surplus renewable electricity. And so that made me start to think about, what are other opportunities that we can have large scale renewable electricity to support the growth of these countries. And I was fortunate enough at that time that my brother and one of his colleagues had started developing this idea, which became Sun Cable. And I joined them, and the three of us developed this concept, which is basically developing the world's largest solar farm in Australia's Northern Territory, and then having exported that electricity through to Singapore. And that really was an attempt to say, how do we decarbonize our grids at scale that can get us to net zero? And that's worth roughly about 7 to 8% of global emissions reduction if we can build an integrated grid across Asia. So it was kind of a big bet. And then the final part of my journey came to Cyan Ventures, where I am now. And I guess Sun Cable, again, joining the dots backwards, was a realization that these first of a kind projects are really hard. If we use our economics language, they've got multiple market failures. They've got information failures that investors don't fully understand the risks and opportunities, and so it makes investment harder to attract. But it also has coordination failures. You've got multiple gaps of supply chains, which offtake contracts with regulatory frameworks which may not be fit for purpose. And so you need to do all these things simultaneously to get these projects through. And so Cyan Ventures basically tries to curate that support to get these first of a kind projects into deployment. And the way we do this is a combination of some research, but we do a lot of advisory work, even with governments and investors, to help them understand what the shifts that need to be. And we actually support directly first of a kind projects to help them get to financial close. So that was a long-winded way of saying that careers move in very different ways, and you really do join the dots backwards. But I think economics has always played a really important role for me. I'm very thankful for having that economics training to be able to understand some of the core issues and feel like I had the toolkit to be able to tackle them.
Thank you. I feel like it's definitely really great to hear about such a fluid career that really showcases the way in which economics can take you from international organizations to consulting to venture capital and sort of that financial arm, which is obviously heavily linked with economics, and showing how you can kind of use that economic toolkit in a range of different areas within economics and across sort of economic adjacent areas as well. So thank you very much. That was great to hear. To go on to our next question, which you've kind of touched on a little bit in reference to the MAC curves, but can you tell us a little bit about the applicability of what you have learned in university to what you do now, or maybe in some of those previous roles that you've taken on? And are there any important models or theories that you still apply today?
Look, economics has probably sometimes played a major role in my career, sometimes played a minor role, but it's always been there. So I was, when I was at the World Bank and previously a lecturer at Oxford University, it was a major of what I was doing. But now I'd say it's more a minor a supporting role in my career, but it's been nonetheless really important. And the reason it's been really important is just that toolkit to be able to really dive into an issue and pick it apart, understand where the market failures are, where the gaps are, and then what's the cost benefit of different actions and the optimal pathway. So that kind of rigor that an economics degree gives, I think, is so crucial, and it's why I think it's such a valuable course of study for people to pursue. I would say obviously what I learned at university, the world looks very different to that. The classic thing we learned at university was, imagine taxes don't exist, and then it would lead to an efficient outcome. So there's a number of things in economic theory that we have to we hold equal, but those things, those ceteris paribus conditions, those are the things actually really crucial that make the difference in the actual commercial workplace. So I'd say that I guess the way that I think about applying economics today is really taking a closer look at some of those assumptions that we assumed were given in the economics classrooms, and trying to understand that given that many of them are not actually can be assumed to be given, what does the world look like as a result, and how do we find ways to around them? And I think that becomes a really interesting and rich exercise. So economics is, as I say, probably more of a minor in what I do now, but it's still a really important part of the toolkit I use daily.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I think thinking of economics as a way to frame problems and to kind of as a framework for problem solving is definitely aligned to how I often use my economics background as well. And what I think is probably one of the most useful aspects, or maybe that's a bit far, but one of the very useful aspects of economics and studying economics is the fact that it allows you to sort of approach something in a structured way with theories to back you up in how you critically analyze it.
Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. So to go on to our next question, Australia has a great advantage in renewable energy, but in your experience as a partner at a technology incubation firm, what other areas do you see Australia being able to branch into?
I think Australia has the key ingredients to be a powerhouse in this shift to a clean energy economy, and there's three reasons that when I think about that I think bring it home to me. One is just the quality of the resources that we have available. So take one of those examples in solar. Australia has 58 million petajoules of solar potential annually that falls on our country. And to give you a sense of that, that's enough to power the world 100 times over. So we have an incredible solar resource. We also have incredible abundance of critical resources, and we have land. These are things that very few countries have as a starting point. But then the second thing is that we have a really strong rule of law, the strong transparency, strong governance, and that becomes crucial for welcoming FDI. And the third piece of this is our innovation capabilities. At Cyan Ventures, we're very fortunate to work with so many great founders and startups, and I'm always amazed at the innovative potential we have in this country. University of New South Wales played a leading role in the development of solar. You can pick a whole range of different industries where the fingerprints of Australian entrepreneurs are all over them. So those three things, that the exceptional resources, that strong rule of law, and that innovative potential that we have, I think give Australia a unique advantage. In terms of what are particular areas, there's lots of areas that we get particularly excited about, but I'd call out probably three that I think are particularly exciting. The first is on low carbon liquid fuels. So this is basically everything from the fuels that we use in aircraft to fuels we use in railways, and the fuels that we use in, say, trucking. Australia needs to have a rapid production of these, not only for decarbonisation, but also energy security. We import over 80% of our fuel and only have about 30 days of fuel reserve. So that makes us really vulnerable from a security standpoint. But Australia also has an incredible amount of biofuel resources that we could potentially develop and create whole new export industries. The second area is around data centers. And I always find that a lot of discussion at the moment about data centers and huge amount of energy that they're going to be using, and how do we manage this? And I think sometimes we frame this question in the wrong way. For me, data centers can offer really two big advantages for Australia's transition. One is that they typically have off-takers and developers with incredible balance sheets. And that's really important with the clean energy transition, because that kind of investment can be anchoring a whole low carbon precinct. So you can think about sort of data centers as your key tenant, which then allow you to bring up a whole bunch of renewable electricity to service not just that data center, but the surrounding industrial precinct around it. And this is a really important piece of actually making the transition happen. The quality of balance sheets is really something that sort of dwarfs a number of the other concerns in the transition. The second piece of that, though, is actually using AI to really think about how we lower the cost and speed the deployment of carbon emissions abatement. So, going back to the start where we talked about these MAC curves, these marginal abatement cost curves, if you look at those cost curves today, they're kind of like an AI-free zone. We haven't really done really strong quality thinking to understand what would that look like differently if we had full deployment of AI technologies. And so I think that's a really exciting opportunity about Australia thinking, how do we use AI to really get ourselves down that carbon abatement cost curve and make the transition a lot more cost efficient and faster than it otherwise would be. And the final one is around household energy use. And I think there's some technologies that are developing now, including ones that we're working with, where we can, in effect, democratize the energy transition. The challenge at the moment is that the energy transition is not only too slow, it's very unequal. And some of the people that are missing out in those groups are people such as renters who, don't have the incentive to do solar and batteries, or it could be around, the people who have invested in things like solar, but they can't get full benefits of that because they're still got an energy contract with an energy major where they're not really getting the full benefits of that. So we're starting to see some really interesting innovations. Like one is there's a company called Smartizer that does batteries that are designed for renters. So literally plug and play, just put them in your wall and you're ready to go. So this is really exciting because as a renter, it means you could basically go down to your local energy retailer, pick up a battery, plug it in yourself without an electrician. And this makes it a lot easier for renters to say, look, actually, I want to be able to invest in that and have the savings. But we also have virtual power plants, which are these effectively connecting batteries and solar system and EV chargers so they operate as a flexible power station. And there's really interesting new companies like High Flow Connect, which are basically coming out with new kind of VPPs, which allow households to directly sell that electricity into the wholesale markets and get much more revenue as a result. So these things, which I probably group under kind of democratizing the energy transition, I think is a third one, which I think is really exciting.
That was really interesting to hear. I really liked, especially your conversations around data centers and AI. I feel like I've worked a little bit in those spaces as well as in the climate space, and they're often sort of segregated into their own siloed economic pieces and their own sort of discussions around innovation ecosystems for AI and data centers, and then decarbonization and transition is its own thing that we don't often sort of see how they actually do connect and how we can kind of use them. If we think about them together, how you can use data centers and AI to support the transition, which is obviously such a big problem that would benefit from a bit more innovative thinking around it. Thank you so much. So to go on to the next question, I have seen that your organization has published a number of reports and insights related to green industry and sustainability. If our listeners had to read just one, which one would it be? And could you tell us a little bit about what it discusses?
Well, I think they should read them all, but if they only had to read one, I'd say there's one that I wrote back in July, so a few months ago now, which was called Focal Fail, and basically FOC stands for first of a kind, and basically it reinforces the importance that first of a kind projects in clean industry are crucial to get to net zero. So almost about half of the carbon abatement that we need to get to net zero is linked to these first of a kind projects. So these are everything from the low carbon liquid fuels projects or green iron. And the first of a kind projects are uniquely difficult because they don't have a precedent. And they're also core to Australia's whole economic opportunity with the clean energy transition. And in that article, I interviewed a number of leading thinkers in this space, particularly in the US, about what makes first of a kind projects difficult and what are better ways that we can support these projects to maximize the probability they get through to financial close and get into deployment. So I guess the reason I liked that article was that it was a good opportunity for me to just listen and learn from some really smart minds and how they think about this. And I also think it has some real direct applicability to the stage of the energy transition that we're in right now in Australia.
No, that sounds like a great way to sort of definitely get across the current thinking, the current areas that we're currently working in, and yes, those issues that are currently facing Australian industry development, which are hopefully our aspiring economists will be jumping in and fixing for us in the coming years. For our final question, we are seeing global economies starting to make real progress on climate and sustainability goals. In your expertise on green industry, what do you think is Australia's next biggest barrier to tackle in order to support transition?
So I think it's linked to that last point I was making, is that it's around these first of a kind projects. And at the moment in Australia, we're pretty good in terms of the lab to seed stage. So we've got a number of sort of accelerators and incubators that try to get ideas out of the lab and into some initial seed funding. It's not perfect, it's slower than it could be, but there is a lot of activity that's going on at that level. But then when you go from that seed or feasibility stage through to actual deployment, there's this yawning gap. And we're not very good at that next stage. And you see an incredible drop off of projects after that sort of seed stage. And so this is where I think is a real opportunity for Australia, is how do we think about a more curated, targeted approach to getting these projects from the seed or feasibility stage through to actual deployment, and realizing that even the best founder teams are not going to be able to do that themselves. There's a range of market failures, as would say, that are beyond the scope of those founder teams to manage. But there are some really interesting models that are starting to look at this. As I said, in the US, they've started to develop these kind of first of a kind project accelerators. And there are also models that we're trying to prove out here in Australia about how we can adapt those models to the Australian context. So I think that's a really exciting area to watch, because I think that's really at the center of where we are now. Is we've got some great ideas that have come out of the lab. How do we take them now from that seed stage and get them into the deployment?
This is going off script a little bit, but is this something that is very specific to Australia and requires like a quite Australian centric approach to solving? Or is this, like, as you're saying, you're seeing it in the US as well? Is it something that's sort of proliferating around the globe and is a more general barrier?
It's in some ways it's a more general global issue. So there's a Mission Possible Partnership is this global organization of leading industries and think tanks that are basically trying to support these first of a kind projects at the global level. So globally, we recognize that this is really important. I think the nuance in Australia is that we have a lot of these projects that we need to make happen as part of our clean energy transition, because of the nature of our opportunities, from green iron to low carbon liquid fuels, etc. So they become more important than for the average country, because the potential is so high in Australia. But secondly, is that even though the first of a kind projects may be a global challenge, the specificities are always local. And so, how you get a first of a kind project in low carbon liquid fuels in Australia through to financial close will look different from the same kind of project in Europe. So we need that kind of tailored approach, and with a greater urgency in Australia, just because of the size of the opportunity.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I think we are finished with all of my questions that I had already listed out, but is there anything else that you'd want to talk about or say to our aspiring economists who are all listening to this podcast before we finish?
Well, thank you very much for having me on this. And the reason I was excited to do this is that I feel very thankful of my exposure to economics. It started off at school, and I had a teacher who was, like most people, it starts with an inspiring teacher, and that was the same with me, who really sort of opened my eyes up to the world of economics, and I've been able to follow that throughout my career. And I really hope that we have a lot of students that choose a similar sort of economics pathway, because it's a really important toolkit. We don't know what the world's going to look like, in 10 to 15 years, but we do know that kind of rigorousness that you get in a toolkit of economics, and being able to understand the market phase and the choices available, and then assess them thoroughly, are going to be really important skills. So I'd encourage all people to who are considering economics to really closely investigate that, because I think it's a pathway that's worth doing. And for those current economists that are listening to this, I hope they continue to do their good work and progress, because we're going to need a lot of good thinkers to solve some of the economic challenges we face in the coming years.
Definitely agree. Thank you so much, Fraser. I really appreciate you coming on to the podcast, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Morgan.